knit, so I've just learned my knitting never made me very famous. But the other two things are not too bad. So thank you for sharing as the new academic year is about to start. Well, I believe there hardly can be an easier subject for a pastor to speak on than the topic extending love. Don't you think? Extending love through words and actions, that's the core of our calling. So if I gave you 2 minutes, how many groups of people could you list that a pastor extends or can extend God's love to? Do you think you would come up with more than 15? The time was up when I had 30 on my list. Let's see if this works so you can see my list. No? Extending love to members, to those who left our church, to visitors, to children, youth, adults, elderly, to students and intellectuals, to the sick, the shut-ins, the carers, people with disabilities, to the single one, married, divorced, widowed, to the elders, departmental leaders, to the bereaved, to the immigrants, to the homeless, to the ones in need, to the abused, to the church's neighborhood and wider community, to own family and friends and neighbors, to those who do not love me being their pastor. Now, I believe that every single one of us can take this stage this morning and share with the rest some moments and ideas how you have extended God's love and it brought the desired effect. Be it peace, reconciliation, renewed hope or motivation, lifting of burdens, some kind of change, or more mature faith in God. Just like Sophia, you all and your departments and your churches, we all have a story to share. And if the slides were working, you would see a collage of pictures from my ministry in Scotland that I could tell you about. And I believe if I share with you how we try to do ministry together as a family and the beautiful impacts of our efforts, I'm sure at least some of you would be inspired to adopt these ideas in your part of the world. I would be utmost delighted. And I think doing that, I would have fulfilled my given task. But it was in May that I abandoned this straightforward trajectory of my talk. Listening to one of our students at Newbold, I realized that the list I produced has a significant blind spot. Now, of course, if I compared my list with yours, they would differ. But I am now convinced that one specific group of people ought to be on all of them. Yet it was missing from mine. The student came to my office unannounced. He did not have any questions about Greek or Hebrew. He just came for a chat. Now, this is not a type of student who is exploring God's calling. He's the type of student who wants to do ministry and only full-time ministry in the future. And because birds of feather flock together, he became a very close friend with another student who also has been very serious about and engaged in ministry, following and shadowing pastors, attending church events beyond the requirements of students' placement. I had perceived both of these students as all in for pastoral ministry. But now one was sitting in front of me, sharing his bewilderment that the other one no longer aspired to be a pastor. My why was answered quickly. He thinks there is too much politics in the church and among pastors. Maybe being a chaplain is a better choice. To be honest, hearing the response did not strike me like a thunder. For a split second, I pondered, what form did the phenomenon called politics morphed into when the students spotted it? Surely, the positive politics, the behaviors that build workplaces up, that would not have put him off from aspiring to join our community of pastors, right? So he must have an encounter with the other type of politics. And I silently wondered if his encounter was similar to the ones imprinted in my own memory. Could it be that he saw a pastor leaving the hall and complaining that the one asked to preach at the event is not seasoned enough in ministry? Or could he witness a character assassination of a pastor at a nominating or executive committee in which other colleagues were involved? Did he notice a pastor rejoicing over hiccups at an event organized by another pastor? Or did he observe pastors protecting their own voted-in positions more than supporting a colleague who was dealing with some really difficult members? Or did he see pastors discussing in little groups who should sit at the right and at the left? This can go. At the right, at the left, at the seats of power. Sadly, I could surely not deny to the student that workplace politics exist, and specifically the negative politics exist among the ministerial pastors. Neither was it appropriate for me to downplay its existence by saying, surely there is negative politics among chaplains too. I was surprised how much was going on in my mind in just that short period of time. One more. There was a text that came to my mind, the same text that Adam alluded to, and I had read it just earlier that morning. I had written sermons on that text, and that was the first time that those words clicked in my mind very differently. I suddenly realized the weight of these words when they become an appeal on us, pastors, regardless of the role we currently function in. As I loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everybody will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It was at that moment that I spotted my blind spot. On my list, there were 30 groups of people a pastor can extend God's love to, but I did not write down extending God's love to my colleagues. Would that appear on your list? Now, I must admit, I was utmost disappointed with myself for omitting it, because even in this auditorium, there are some of my colleagues who over the years have become closer to me than blood family. So how is it that this group slipped my mind when I was going through the brainstorming exercise? And why is it that I'm suspicious that had we really done the exercise together at the beginning, I would not be the only one? Could it be because our pastors' minds are to a degree guided by the dutiful obligations outlined in the job description? It was the hospital visits and the home visits, the English classes and the preaching seminars I used to conduct. All the fundraising initiatives for women's aid and young carers, those led me to write on my list the groups that you saw: the sick, the bereaved, the immigrants, the elders, the needy, abused, and carers. With these activities, there is so much planning, there is funding available, there are all sorts of form about the outcomes. But when it comes to loving our colleagues, that is free of red tape. It might be automatically expected of pastors, but it is not officially required. We are blessed when it happens, but we hardly plan for it. And unless you are a ministerial secretary, we do not account for it. Neither are we called to account when we neglect it or when we undermine it. So it seems that the omission is just the out of sight, out of mind effect. But if extending God's love to colleagues is not on our pastor's radar, what impact does it have on our community? How significant is such blind spot? Well, we must admit that the general reputation of our community suffers damage. The observation made by the student that there is negative politics in our circles would certainly gain more positive votes in a opinion poll, than we would like to. We are not known as those who love one another. And there is also an impact on us as individuals too. Every now and then, the news is passed on in whispers that one of us reached a burnout or resigned from ministry altogether. There is one advice given to pastors how to avoid burnout and flourish in ministry, and it is to strengthen our support networks. Now, how can that be done? Who can play an active role in such a support network? Is not the phrase, one another, a good enough clue to inspire us to include it in our answer? To include the support from within the pastoral community. Love one another. We need one another. Fulfilling our God-given task is a team effort. So why then should an outsider or a student studying for ministry spot us acting as if it was written, the harvest is small, the workers are too many, some can leave? Why should we perceive each other as threat or rivals and neglect mutual support? Why should anybody assured of God's calling be hesitant to join our community? And how can we encourage such person not to abandon their calling in spite of the visible issues in our community that are quite the opposite of the gospel we proclaim? I usually invite such people, and surely all our students, to catch a glimpse of the reality that is most often invisible to the naked eye. I speak to them of the existence of support networks that often start forming during the time of one's preparation for ministry. These do not run far and wide, yet they have the function of saving us. These are the safety nets into which we fall. They even have the potential to make one grateful that they have accepted God's calling to pastoral ministry. What am I talking about? The unreported moments and occasions when we pastors extended God's love to each other. My personal testimony about what pastoral ministry is like would be incomplete if I did not mention my very first placement supervisor and other senior pastors and lecturers who went an extra mile beyond what was prescribed by their role. They came to our wedding, dedicated our children, anointed our sick son, and over the years gave us their best opinions and guidance when other people could not even relate what were the issues we were facing. Talking about ministry means talking about my colleague who is never tired discussing sermoning ideas. We are not rivals. We do not withhold the best ideas and formulations for our own sermons. We help one another to become better preachers. I also love to reminisce on the oxymoron, the beauty of COVID times. What beauty? Beauty of working closely together with my colleagues, of getting to know them better, of learning how to communicate in a clearer way and how to forgive when plans did not go our ways. Do you remember? We went through COVID together. And if you ask our 3 children what it is like to be a pastor's child, I'm sure they would mention a number of pastors who came to our house or we went to visit them. Each one of them was given an attribute, like the uncle who loves fried fish, or Uncle Bishop, roly-poly uncle, uncle with a funny little cactus in his kitchen. Your kind actions made you a role model, a significant figure in our children's lives. We had to explain to them that you are not blood uncle and aunties, you are only church family. God brought you into our lives. And finally, speaking of ministry, I might even mention why I never sent my letter of resignation with immediate effect, which I did write. It was because of a colleague who was listening to me crying on the phone that I was really ready to quit ministry. And then he burst into prayer. Lord, we cannot lose Ivana. Till this day you haven't. Because I was blessed by having around me colleagues who again and again extended God's love to me. God used you to convince me that my efforts matter in His sight. And I am sure that all this is important for the next generation to hear. So can you add your own stories to mine? Stories that foster the mindset and remind us how much we need one another and how much indeed we mean to one another. Stories that witness to the fact that being a pastor is tough, but it is also amazing, one-of-a-kind life path too. Stories that being a pastor's child is not only an additional stress, but additional blessing too. Imagine if people can glimpse these veins running through our pastoral community, and they are used by the Holy Spirit to renew our strength. Imagine that these veins would become as visible as skin, and we can be known as those who love one another. How can these support networks be strengthened? How can they reach our new colleagues? How can they stretch towards the retired ones? I have no doubts that we will leave this EPC better equipped to extend God's love to many people around us in our sphere of influence. But I wonder if our blind spot will receive our attention too. Will you and I become or continue to be a member of the internal support networks? Will we create any new ones? Will Christ-like love be seen in our daily interactions? As I stand here, I'm committed to do better in the future than I did in the past. I think it's needed. How about you? Thank you for your attention.